Hey everyone, and welcome back to another night with me to explore the strangest, most unsettling dream experiences throughout history. Tonight we're diving into something that'll probably make you check your own arms and legs. The bizarre accounts of dreamers who grew additional body parts in their sleep and could feel every single sensation. So before you settle in for the night, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these weird historical deep dives. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see our global community of insomniacs and dream enthusiasts checking in from everywhere. Now get comfortable, dim those lights, maybe grab that favorite pillow, and prepare to question everything you think you know about the boundaries of the human body. And honestly, don't stress if you drift off somewhere in the middle. That's pretty much the whole idea here. Picture this. It's 1503 in Florence and Leonardo da Vinci, the guy who painted the Mona Lisa and invented flying machines 500 years. Too early is having the most bizarre recurring dream of his entire life. And this is a man who dreamed about flying underwater breathing apparatus and war machines that wouldn't be built for centuries, so we're talking seriously weird territory here. In Leonardo's dream, he would wake up in his workshop, or at least he thought he was awake, and discover that he had grown 4 additional arms during the night. Not just any arms, mind you, but perfectly functional, fully articulated limbs that he could control as naturally as his original 2. He described being able to paint with one hand, write mirror script with another, operate mechanical devices with a third, and sketch anatomical drawings with a fourth, all while his remaining 2 hands prepared pigments and arranged his tools. I mean, imagine the productivity boost. Da Vinci was already trying to be a painter, sculptor, inventor, engineer, scientist, and anatomist all at the same time. With 6 arms, he was basically the Renaissance equivalent of having multiple browser tabs open, except each tab had its own fully functional limb. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Leonardo didn't just dream about having extra arms. He could feel everything. The weight of brushes in each hand, the texture of parchment under his fingertips, the resistance of metal as he turned screws and adjusted mechanical parts. He wrote in his notebooks about the completeness of sensation in his dream limbs, describing how each additional arm had its own distinct sense of touch, its own relationship to temperature and pressure. In one notebook entry that still exists today, Leonardo wrote, "In my dreams of many hands, I am more myself than when awake. Each limb serves the mind's purpose without conflict or hesitation. Why does waking reduce me to merely 2 instruments when the soul clearly requires 6? The really unsettling part? Leonardo became so accustomed to his 6-armed dream state that he would wake up feeling disabled. He'd reach for multiple tools simultaneously, forgetting that he only had 2 hands available. His assistants reported that he would sometimes stand in front of his easel making 6 different motions at once, as if his brain was still sending signals to limbs that weren't there. Now, you have to understand that Leonardo's workshop was like mission control for Renaissance innovation. He had dozens of projects going simultaneously, anatomical studies scattered across multiple tables, engineering diagrams pinned to every wall, half-finished paintings on easels throughout the room, and mechanical prototypes in various stages of completion. Under normal circumstances, managing all these projects would have required an entire team of assistants and apprentices. But during his 6-armed dreams, Leonardo could coordinate all of this work personally. He would move through his workshop like some kind of creative octopus, his phantom arms working independently on different projects, while maintaining perfect awareness of what each limb was accomplishing. He could feel the texture of oil paint through one set of fingertips while simultaneously sensing the spring tension in a mechanical device through another set, and detecting the grain direction in wooden components through his remaining phantom hands. Leonardo's dream journals describe the sensation of 6-armed work in almost mystical terms. He wrote about experiencing the symphony of creation, where each arm contributed its own melody to a larger creative composition. His left phantom arm specialized in detailed anatomical sketching, developing an expertise in rendering muscle fibers and bone structures that exceeded his conscious anatomical knowledge. His right phantom arm became expert in mechanical engineering, designing gear ratios and leverage systems that Leonardo's waking mind struggled to understand. The psychological impact was profound. Leonardo began to feel like his waking, two-armed state was a form of creative paralysis. He would stand in his workshop feeling frustrated and limited, as if he'd been reduced from a complete creative being to a mere shadow of his true potential. His assistants noticed that he would often stare at his hands with a mixture of disappointment and longing, as if mourning the loss of limbs he'd never actually possessed. But here's where Leonardo's six-armed dreams become historically significant. They directly influenced his most important artistic and scientific work. During the period when these dreams were most frequent, roughly 1503 to 1506, Leonardo created some of his most innovative paintings and made breakthrough discoveries in anatomy, engineering, and physics that wouldn't be fully understood for centuries. The Mona Lisa, which he began during this period, shows evidence of techniques that seem to require more coordination than two hands could provide. Art historians have noted that the painting demonstrates simultaneously executed brush techniques, detailed work on facial features, occurring at the same time as broader atmospheric effects in the background. It's as if multiple artists with different specializations were working on the canvas simultaneously, yet the style remains unmistakably Leonardo's. Leonardo's anatomical studies from this period are even more remarkable. He was dissecting cadavers and creating detailed drawings of human internal structures that required incredible precision and speed. Cadavers don't preserve well, especially in Renaissance Italy without refrigeration. But Leonardo's anatomical sketches from his six-armed dream period show multiple simultaneous perspectives of the same organs, as if he could draw them from several angles at once while keeping the cadaver in optimal condition. His engineering notebooks from this time contain mechanical designs that seem to emerge fully formed, with no preliminary sketches or development stages. Complex machines like his flying apparatus, tank designs, and hydraulic systems appear in his notebooks as complete, detailed schematics that show evidence of sophisticated three-dimensional thinking and mechanical understanding that was centuries ahead of contemporary engineering knowledge. Leonardo became obsessed with understanding this phenomenon. He started conducting what we'd now call neuroscience experiments, studying the relationship between dreaming and physical capability. He would stay awake for days, trying to maintain conscious access to his phantom arms through meditation and focused visualization. He experimented with different sleeping positions, dietary changes, and even various herbal preparations that might enhance his six-armed dream experiences. In his private journals, Leonardo wrote extensively about the philosophical implications of his phantom limbs. He theorized that the human soul might naturally possess six-armed form, and that physical incarnation into two-armed bodies was a limitation imposed by material existence. He speculated that his dreams were allowing him temporary access to his soul's true configuration, unconstrained by the boundaries of flesh and bone. The dreams reached their peak intensity during the winter of 1505, when Leonardo was simultaneously working on the Mona Lisa, conducting anatomical research, designing fortifications for Cesare Borgia, and developing his theories about flight and hydraulics. His assistants reported that he would often work through the night, but in the morning they would find evidence of work that seemed to require more hands than Leonardo possessed. Tools would be found in configurations that suggested multiple simultaneous users. Paint palettes would show evidence of 6 different color mixtures being prepared at once. Anatomical drawings would be found in various stages of completion, as if several artists had been working on different aspects of the same sketches simultaneously. Most mysteriously, Leonardo's workshop would sometimes be found perfectly organized in the morning, with dozens of projects cleaned up and properly stored in ways that should have taken hours of careful work. Leonardo's six-armed dreams also influenced his understanding of human potential and creativity. He began developing educational theories about expanding human capability through dream training and visualization exercises. He wrote about the possibility of teaching artists and craftsmen to access phantom limb sensations that would enhance their professional skills. Some historians believe that Leonardo's teaching methods, which produced unusually skilled students, incorporated techniques derived from his phantom arm experiences. The social impact of Leonardo's enhanced productivity during this period was significant. He was able to accept multiple commissions simultaneously, complete complex projects in unprecedented timeframes, and produce innovations across several different fields of study. His reputation as a universal genius was largely established during his six-armed dream period, when he demonstrated capabilities that seemed superhuman to his contemporaries. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Leonardo's six-armed dreams was their apparent connection to his scientific insights. Many of his breakthrough discoveries in anatomy, physics, and engineering seemed to emerge directly from sensations he experienced through his phantom limbs. He would describe feeling the flow of blood through arteries in cadavers through his phantom hands, sensing the principles of leverage and mechanical advantage through his dream arms, and experiencing the aerodynamics of bird flight through phantom limbs that could somehow detect air currents and pressure variations. Leonardo's notebooks contain descriptions of phantom limb sensations that correspond remarkably well with modern scientific understanding of topics he shouldn't have been able to research effectively. His phantom hands apparently allowed him to feel molecular adhesion in paint pigments, detect structural stress patterns in architectural designs, and sense the flow dynamics in water and air that wouldn't be mathematically described until centuries later. Then, quite suddenly, the dreams stopped. Leonardo woke up one morning in March 1506 feeling diminished and clumsy, as he described it in his journal. The return to standard human proportions was so disorienting that he couldn't paint for several weeks, complaining that his arms felt stubby and inadequate compared to the six-limbed creative force he'd grown accustomed to in his dreams. Leonardo's post-dream artwork shows a marked change in approach. His paintings became more conventional in their execution, though they retained the sophisticated techniques he'd developed during his phantom arm period. His scientific work became more methodical and less intuitive, as if he'd lost access to direct sensational knowledge that had previously guided his research. The psychological impact of losing his six-armed dream state was severe. Leonardo fell into a period of depression and creative frustration that lasted nearly a year. He wrote extensively about feeling imprisoned within inadequate flesh and mourning the loss of his true creative form. His assistants reported that he would sometimes stand motionless in his workshop, staring at unfinished projects as if trying to remember how to complete them with only two hands. Leonardo spent his remaining years trying to recapture his six-armed dream experiences through various methods. He experimented with lucid dreaming techniques, attempted to recreate the environmental conditions that had triggered his phantom limb dreams, and even designed mechanical devices that might simulate the sensation of having additional arms. None of these efforts successfully restored his six-armed dream state, though they led to innovations in prosthetics and mechanical assistance devices that were centuries ahead of their time. The influence of Leonardo's six-armed dreams extended far beyond his personal creative output. His enhanced productivity during this period established him as the archetypal Renaissance genius, setting standards for artistic and scientific achievement that influenced European culture for centuries. His integration of art, science, and engineering, made possible by his ability to work on multiple projects simultaneously through his phantom arms, became the model for Renaissance humanism and interdisciplinary thinking. Modern neuroscientists studying Leonardo's detailed descriptions of his phantom arm sensations have found remarkable correlations with current understanding of neuroplasticity and phantom limb phenomena. His accounts of sensation, coordination, and enhanced capability through phantom limbs provide insights into brain function that are still relevant to contemporary research on consciousness, embodiment, and human potential. Now, this one's going to sound absolutely insane, but it's documented in multiple sources. Admiral Horatio Nelson, the guy who basically saved Britain from Napoleon at the Battle of Trafalgar, had recurring dreams where he commanded not just ships, but an entire phantom navy that existed as extensions of his own body. Nelson had lost his right arm in 1797 during the Battle of Santa Cruz de Tenerife, and like many amputees, he experienced phantom limb sensations. But Nelson's phantom limb dreams went way beyond typical medical phenomena. Starting about 6 months after his amputation, he began having dreams where his missing arm would regenerate and then continue growing, extending outward until it became, well, this sounds crazy, but it became a living ship. In these dreams, Nelson could feel his phantom arm transforming into a fully functional warship, HMS Victory, to be specific. He could sense the wood grain of the deck through his arm ship, feel the tension in the rigging through his extended nervous system, and experience the motion of waves through what he described as my wooden flesh. But it didn't stop there. In his dream state, Nelson's phantom arm ship would sprout additional arms, each becoming another vessel in his fleet. He'd have dozens of ships extending from his body like some kind of maritime octopus, each one fully under his direct sensory control. He could feel cannonballs hitting his hull arms, sense the wind filling his sail fingers, and experience the coordination of an entire naval battle through his extended phantom body. Nelson wrote to his wife about these dreams, describing them as more real than waking life. My dearest Emma, in sleep, I am not a disabled man commanding ships. I am the ships themselves, feeling every wave, every wind, every enemy cannonball as if it strikes my own flesh. Now, you have to understand the context here. Nelson was dealing with not just the phantom pain that's common after amputation, but the psychological trauma of losing his dominant arm at the height of his naval career. The man who had built his reputation on personal courage and hands-on leadership suddenly found himself physically diminished, dependent on subordinates for tasks he'd previously handled himself. But his phantom fleet dreams transformed this disability into something extraordinary. In his dream state, Nelson didn't just command ships, he became them. He could feel the structural integrity of his vessel arms, sense the morale of his crew fingers, and experience the tactical situation of an entire naval engagement through his extended phantom nervous system. The sensory detail in these dreams was remarkable. Nelson described feeling the different wood types used in ship construction through his phantom. Limbs, the flexibility of English oak in his hull arms, the lightness of Baltic pine in his mast fingers, the density of tropical hardwoods in his gun deck extensions. He could sense the condition of his canvas sails through phantom nerve endings, feel the tension in rope rigging through his extended proprioceptive system, and detect changes in wind and current through phantom sensory organs that existed only in his dreams. Nelson's phantom fleet dreams weren't just passive experiences. They were interactive training simulations that allowed him to experiment with naval tactics in ways that would have been impossible in real life. He could feel the consequences of different battle formations through his ship arms, sense how changes in wind direction would affect his phantom fleet's maneuverability, and experience the results of various strategic decisions through direct sensory feedback. In his private journals, Nelson wrote extensively about the tactical insights he gained through his phantom fleet experiences. He described being able to feel the enemy's intentions through the water, sensing how opposing fleets would respond to his maneuvers through phantom vibrations that traveled between his ship arms and enemy vessels. He could detect weaknesses in enemy formations through phantom sensations that he compared to feeling someone's pulse through their skin. The psychological impact of these dreams was profound. Nelson began to view his phantom fleet as more real and reliable than his actual ships and crews. He would wake up feeling disappointed to return to commanding separate vessels through verbal orders and visual signals, rather than controlling them through direct sensory connection. His phantom fleet gave him a level of tactical awareness and coordination that was impossible to achieve through conventional naval command structures. But here's where Nelson's phantom fleet dreams become historically significant. They directly influenced the development of revolutionary naval tactics that changed the course of European warfare. During the period when his phantom fleet dreams were most intense, roughly 1803 to 1805, Nelson developed the strategic innovations that would make him the most successful admiral in British naval history. The famous Nelson Touch, his breakthrough battle formation that allowed smaller British fleets to defeat larger enemy forces, emerged directly from insights he gained through his phantom fleet dreams. Instead of traditional line-of-battle tactics where ships fought in parallel formations, Nelson developed perpendicular attack strategies where his fleet could break through enemy lines and engage multiple vessels simultaneously. This tactical innovation only makes sense when you understand that Nelson experienced his ships as extensions of his own body. Traditional admirals thought of naval battles as coordination problems between separate units. But Nelson's Phantom Fleet dreams allowed him to experience battle formations as unified body movements. He could feel how his ship arms needed to move in relation to each other to achieve maximum effectiveness, just as a person naturally coordinates their limbs when performing complex physical tasks. Nelson's subordinate officers reported that his battle orders during this period seemed to come from supernatural tactical awareness. He would position ships in locations that seemed strategically questionable until the battle developed, at which point his formations would prove to be perfectly positioned to exploit weaknesses that weren't apparent until enemy movements revealed them. Captain Thomas Hardy, Nelson's flag captain, wrote in his journal, "The admiral moves his fleet as a man moves his fingers with intuitive precision that seems to transcend normal command. It is as if he feels the battle through every ship under his command, anticipating enemy actions through sensations that ordinary observation cannot provide." The most remarkable aspect of Nelson's Phantom Fleet dreams was their apparent ability to provide accurate intelligence about enemy activities. Nelson would wake up from these dreams with detailed knowledge about enemy fleet positions, ship conditions, and tactical intentions that proved to be startlingly accurate when confirmed through conventional reconnaissance. During the months leading up to the Battle of Trafalgar, Nelson's Phantom Fleet dreams provided him with information about French and Spanish naval preparations that allowed him to position his forces with unprecedented strategic advantage. He knew which enemy ships were undermanned, which captains were reluctant to engage, and which vessels had mechanical problems that would affect their battle performance information that should have been impossible to obtain through normal intelligence gathering. Nelson described these intelligence streams in letters to the Admiralty, writing, "My phantom ships sail alongside the enemy fleet in dreams, feeling their weaknesses through hull-to-hull contact, sensing their fears through shared waters. I know their capabilities as intimately as I know my own, for in dreams we are all part of the same naval organism." The Battle of Trafalgar itself unfolded almost exactly as Nelson had experienced it in his Phantom Fleet dreams. His tactical decisions seemed to anticipate enemy movements with impossible precision, as if he could feel the entire battle through his ships rather than merely observing it from his flagship. Witnesses reported that Nelson issued orders to vessels that were miles away, predicting exactly when they would need to change course or adjust their position, even when those ships were beyond visual range. The psychological preparation that Nelson's Phantom Fleet dreams provided was equally important. By the time of Trafalgar, Nelson had experienced similar naval engagements dozens of times through his Phantom Fleet consciousness. He knew exactly how his ship arms would feel when hit by enemy fire, how his phantom nervous system would respond to battle damage, and how to maintain tactical coordination even when individual vessel limbs were severely damaged. During the actual battle, Nelson demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to maintain awareness of his entire fleet's status. He seemed to know instantly when any of his ships sustained damage, when crews were struggling with particular challenges, and when tactical opportunities were developing across the widespread engagement. His ability to coordinate complex fleet maneuvers while under enemy fire was so remarkable that it contributed to his reputation as the greatest naval tactician in British history. The really eerie part? During the actual Battle of Trafalgar, Nelson was shot by a French sniper and died aboard HMS Victory. But according to multiple witnesses in his final moments, he kept reaching out with his phantom arm as if still trying to control ships that existed only in his dreams. His last words weren't just, "Kiss me, Hardy." He also whispered something about feeling the fleet departing and my wooden arms growing cold. Captain Hardy reported that Nelson's phantom limb movements during his final moments seemed to correspond with the tactical situation across the entire battle. As Nelson's phantom arm moved, ships throughout his fleet would adjust their positions, as if responding to commands that were being transmitted through some kind of psychic connection rather than conventional signals. The medical officers who attended Nelson during his final hours noted that his phantom limb sensations seemed to intensify as he died. He described feeling his ship arms becoming heavy and cold, his phantom fleet losing the strength to sail, and his extended naval nervous system growing quiet as the battle ends. His death seemed to coincide with the conclusion of the battle itself, as if his phantom fleet consciousness had been sustaining the engagement through pure force of will. Nelson's phantom fleet dreams had implications that extended far beyond naval tactics. His experience of commanding ships as extensions of his own body influenced British naval doctrine for decades, establishing principles of fleet coordination and tactical integration that remained standard practice well into the era of steam-powered vessels. The psychological training methods that emerged from Nelson's Phantom fleet experiences became part of Royal Navy officer education. Future admirals were taught visualization techniques and tactical imagination exercises that were derived from Nelson's accounts of commanding phantom fleets through direct sensory connection. These methods proved remarkably effective at developing the kind of intuitive tactical awareness that distinguished British naval commanders throughout the 19th century. Modern military strategists studying Nelson's phantom fleet dreams have found remarkable parallels with contemporary theories about network-centric warfare and integrated command systems. His experience of controlling multiple vessels through phantom sensory feedback anticipated by centuries the development of electronic systems that allow modern commanders to maintain real-time awareness of widely distributed forces. Neuroscientists researching phantom limb phenomena have found Nelson's case particularly significant because it demonstrates how phantom sensations can extend beyond missing biological limbs to include tools, vehicles, and complex mechanical systems. His detailed descriptions of feeling ships as extensions of his nervous system provide insights into the brain's remarkable ability to incorporate external objects into its body schema, suggesting that the boundaries between self and technology are far more flexible than traditionally understood. Nelson's phantom fleet dreams raise profound questions about the nature of military leadership, tactical intuition, and the relationship between consciousness and complex systems. His ability to experience ships as extensions of his own body suggests that effective command might require a form of psychological integration with the tools and personnel under one's control that goes far beyond conventional leadership training. Either way, Admiral Nelson's phantom fleet dreams not only changed naval warfare, but demonstrated that sometimes our most impossible body experiences can provide insights into coordination, leadership, and strategic thinking that remain relevant centuries later. In 1347, at the monastery of St. Denis just outside Paris, a Benedictine monk named Brother Augustine began having dreams that were so visually overwhelming they left him temporarily blind when he woke up. But these weren't ordinary dreams about seeing things. Augustine dreamed that his entire body was covered with fully functional eyes, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, and he could perceive the world through every single one of them simultaneously. Now, Brother Augustine was known for being a practical, scholarly monk who spent his days illuminating manuscripts and copying religious texts. He wasn't prone to mystical visions or supernatural claims. But starting in the autumn of 3047, right around the time the Black Death was beginning to spread across Europe, Augustine's dreams became so vivid and overwhelming that they started affecting his daily life in ways that worried his fellow monks. In his dream, Augustine would look down at his hands and see that his palms, the backs of his hands, and each individual finger were covered with human eyes. Not just a few eyes scattered around, but dozens of them, all blinking independently, all providing separate visual input that somehow his dream brain could process simultaneously. He could see the pages of his illuminated manuscripts through the eyes on his fingertips, while simultaneously watching other monks through the eyes on his forehead, observing the ceiling through the eyes on the top of his head, and monitoring the floor through the eyes on his feet. Augustine wrote detailed accounts of these dreams in Latin, describing the experience as visio multiplex multiple vision that allowed him to perceive his entire environment from hundreds of different perspectives at once. He said it was like being inside a sphere made of mirrors, but instead of seeing reflections, He was seeing reality from every possible angle simultaneously. But here's what made Augustine's thousand-eye dreams particularly disturbing. He could see things that were happening outside his normal field of vision, even outside the monastery walls. Through his phantom eyes, he claimed to see plague victims in distant villages, political events in Paris, and even scenes from foreign countries that he'd never visited. The sensory experience of having eyes covering every inch of his body was initially overwhelming to the point of causing Augustine severe distress. He described the first few nights of these dreams as torture by infinite sight, where his consciousness was bombarded with visual information from hundreds of different sources. His dream brain had to rapidly adapt to processing simultaneous visual streams from eyes on his shoulders, showing the monastery dormitory, eyes on his chest displaying the altar of the chapel, eyes on his back revealing the herb garden, and eyes on his legs monitoring the stone corridors. What made the experience even more disorienting was that each phantom eye seemed to have its own focus and attention. Augustine could feel his forehead eyes tracking the movement of clouds across the sky, while his arm eyes followed the flight patterns of birds. His torso eyes observed the daily activities of other monks, and his leg eyes monitored small creatures moving through the monastery grounds. It was as if his consciousness had been divided into hundreds of separate visual processors, all operating independently, yet somehow integrated into a single, impossibly complex perceptual system. Augustine's dream journals, written in the careful script that was his professional specialty, described the gradual development of what he called omnivisual coordination. After several weeks of these overwhelming dreams, his brain apparently adapted to processing multiple simultaneous visual streams. He began to experience what he described as the gift of seeing all things at once without confusion, where hundreds of separate visual inputs combined into a single, incredibly detailed understanding of his environment. But the truly remarkable aspect of Augustine's thousand eye dreams was their apparent ability to provide accurate information about distant events. In one dream journal entry that still exists in the Vatican archives, Augustine wrote, "Through the eyes upon my feet I witnessed the dying in Avignon. Through the eyes upon my shoulder blades I observe the King's Council in Paris. Through the eyes upon my chest I see ships burning in English harbors. My body has become a window into all the world's suffering." The accuracy of these distant observations was what first brought Augustine's dreams to the attention of church authorities. When news eventually reached the monastery about events he'd claimed to see in his thousand-eye dreams, the details matched his descriptions with remarkable precision. He'd accurately seen plague outbreaks in cities hundreds of miles away, political developments that wouldn't be confirmed for weeks, and even specific individuals whose deaths he'd witnessed through his phantom eyes. Augustine described the sensation of distant vision through his phantom eyes as feeling like touching the world with sight itself. He could apparently direct his attention to any of his hundreds of phantom eyes and experience whatever that particular eye was observing with complete clarity and detail. Eyes on the back of his neck might be showing him events in Rome, while eyes on his ankles displayed scenes from London, and eyes on his palms revealed activities in distant monasteries. The theological implications of Augustine's thousand-eye dreams created significant discussion among church scholars. Some interpreted his experiences as divine visions, believing that God was granting him supernatural sight to witness the suffering caused by the plague and provide spiritual guidance to the Christian community. Others worried that his dreams might be demonic in origin, arguing that omniscient vision was a divine attribute that humans shouldn't possess. Augustine himself was deeply troubled by the theological questions raised by his dreams. In his journal he wrote, "If these eyes are gifts from the Almighty, why do they show me such suffering that I cannot prevent? If they are temptations from the evil one, why do they inspire in me only compassion for the afflicted? I see all things, yet understand nothing of why I have been chosen for this burden of infinite sight." The psychological impact of experiencing vision through hundreds of phantom eyes was extraordinary. Augustine reported that his normal two-eyed vision began to feel severely limited and inadequate. When he woke up from his thousand-eye dreams, he would spend several minutes feeling disoriented and partially blind, as if returning to normal human vision was like losing the majority of his sensory capability. The visual overload in these dreams was so intense that Augustine would wake up with severe headaches and temporary vision problems. He described feeling like his brain was trying to process far more visual information than it was designed to handle. Sometimes he'd wake up completely blind for several minutes, as if his normal two eyes needed time to recover from the sensory excess he'd experienced in his dreams. Augustine's thousand-eye dreams also affected his work as a manuscript illuminator in remarkable ways. During the period when he was having these dreams, his artistic technique underwent dramatic transformation. His illuminated manuscripts began featuring incredibly detailed backgrounds and marginal decorations that seemed to show multiple perspectives of the same scene simultaneously. Art historians studying his work from this period note that his paintings demonstrate an understanding of three-dimensional space and architectural detail that was unprecedented in medieval manuscript illumination. The really fascinating aspect was how Augustine's phantom eye experiences seemed to enhance his understanding of perspective and visual composition. His illuminated manuscripts from the Thousand Eye Dream period show backgrounds that include accurate architectural details of buildings he'd never visited, landscape elements that correspond to geographical locations he'd never seen, and even astronomical phenomena that weren't visible from his monastery's location. Augustine began incorporating what he called divine perspective into his religious artwork, illuminated manuscripts that showed biblical scenes from multiple viewpoints simultaneously, as if the viewer could see events from the perspective of every witness present. His depictions of the crucifixion, for example, showed the scene from the viewpoint of Mary, John, the Roman soldiers, and various bystanders all within the same image, creating a visual complexity that anticipated Renaissance innovations in perspective by over a century. The other monks initially thought Augustine was having religious visions, perhaps receiving divine revelation about the plague that was devastating Europe. But Augustine insisted these weren't holy visions. They were just dreams about having extra eyes. Dreams so realistic that he could feel the weight of hundreds of eyelids blinking across his skin. Augustine described the physical sensation of his phantom eyes in remarkable detail. He could feel individual eyelids opening and closing across his entire body, sense tears forming in hundreds of separate tear ducts, and experience the muscular coordination required to focus hundreds of different eyes simultaneously. He wrote about the strange sensation of feeling his phantom eyes becoming tired and needing to blink, but never all at the same time. Different groups of eyes would rest while others remained alert, creating a constant state of partial vision that never completely shut down. The social impact of Augustine's thousand-eye dreams was significant within the monastery community. His fellow monks began seeking his counsel about distant events, believing that his phantom vision gave him access to information that could guide their prayers and charitable activities. Augustine reluctantly began providing what he called reports from the eyes of suffering, describing plague conditions in distant communities and identifying specific families or individuals who needed prayers. But Augustine was deeply uncomfortable with the attention his dreams attracted. He worried that pride in his supernatural vision might lead him into spiritual sin, and he struggled with the question of whether he should use information gained through his phantom eyes to guide his actions in the waking world. In his journal, he wrote, "Is it righteous to act upon knowledge gained through means I do not understand? If God grants me sight of distant suffering, am I obligated to respond, or am I being tested through the temptation of forbidden knowledge?" The abbot of St. Denis became so concerned about Augustine's condition that he sent letters to medical scholars in Paris and Italy, describing the monk's symptoms and asking for advice. The responses suggested everything from demonic possession to an excess of visual humors caused by too much manuscript illumination work. Some scholars theorized that Augustine's detailed work with illuminated manuscripts had somehow overstimulated his visual imagination to the point where his dreams became hyperrealistic. Augustine's thousand-eye dreams reached their peak intensity during the spring of 1348, when the Black Death was spreading rapidly across France. During this period, his phantom visions seemed to focus primarily on plague-related scenes, showing him the progression of the disease across Europe with documentary-level detail. He could see through his phantom eyes how the plague spread along trade routes, which communities were most severely affected, and even specific medical details about how the disease progressed in individual victims. The information Augustine gathered through his thousand-eye dreams during this period proved to be remarkably accurate when later confirmed through conventional sources. His descriptions of plague symptoms, mortality rates, and the social breakdown occurring in affected communities matched reports that wouldn't reach the monastery through normal communication channels for weeks or months. Augustine used his phantom eye observations to help his monastery prepare for the plague's arrival. Based on what he'd seen in his dreams, he recommended specific preparations, stockpiling medical supplies, establishing quarantine procedures, and identifying community members who might be particularly vulnerable to the disease. When the plague eventually reached their region, these preparations proved crucial in helping the monastery maintain its religious and social functions while surrounding communities collapsed. But the psychological burden of witnessing so much suffering through his phantom eyes became increasingly difficult for Augustine to bear. He wrote in his journal, "These eyes show me death in every corner of the world, suffering beyond my ability to comprehend or relieve. I see children dying in distant villages, mothers weeping over lost families, entire communities reduced to empty houses and unmarked graves. What purpose does such vision serve if it brings only knowledge of pain that I cannot prevent?" The dreams continued for 8 months, during which time Augustine became increasingly reclusive and began covering mirrors and reflective surfaces in his cell because he said they reminded him too much of his dream state. He also stopped doing illumination work because looking at detailed artwork triggered memories of the overwhelming visual input from his dreams. Then, in May 1348, the dreams suddenly stopped. Augustine woke up one morning feeling like he'd lost something essential, describing the return to normal two-eyed vision as a kind of blindness, as if the world had suddenly become small and flat. He spent weeks adjusting to what he called the poverty of ordinary sight. The really unsettling detail? Augustine lived until 1389, and he spent those 41 years claiming that his normal waking vision felt inadequate compared to what he'd experienced in his thousand-eye dreams. He said reality seemed incomplete and limited after experiencing the world from hundreds of perspectives simultaneously. His detailed dream journals became famous among medieval scholars studying perception and consciousness. Some theorized that Augustine had experienced a form of mystical expansion of consciousness, while others suggested he'd suffered from a medical condition that affected his visual processing during sleep. Augustine's post-dream artwork showed clear influence from his phantom eye experiences. His later illuminated manuscripts continued to demonstrate the enhanced perspective and spatial understanding he'd developed during his thousand-eye period, though they never again achieved the impossible visual complexity of his work during the dream period. Modern neuroscientists studying Augustine's case find it particularly fascinating because it represents one of the most extreme examples of phantom sensory expansion ever documented. His detailed descriptions of coordinating hundreds of simultaneous visual inputs provide insights into brain plasticity and the limits of human sensory processing that remain relevant to contemporary research. Either way, Brother Augustine's thousand-eye dreams represent one of the most extreme cases of phantom sensory expansion in recorded history, and they raise profound questions about the limits of human perception and the relationship between dreaming and reality. In 1559, Sophonisba Anguissola, one of the first internationally recognized female artists of the Renaissance, began having dreams that transformed her understanding of space, perspective, and the physical limitations of the human body. Sophonisba was already famous for her innovative portrait techniques and her ability to capture psychological depth in her paintings, but her elastic limb dreams took her artistic vision into territory that was literally impossible to achieve while awake. In these dreams, Sophonisba would be working in her studio, painting portraits of noble clients, when she would suddenly realize that her arms could stretch like warm wax, extending across the room to reach distant canvases, palettes, and subjects. But this wasn't just visual imagery. She could feel every inch of her elongated limbs, experiencing the sensation of her arm bones softening and lengthening, her muscles adapting to support impossible reaches, and her fingertips maintaining perfect dexterity even when her arms were stretched across 20-foot distances. Now, you have to understand the context of Sophonisba's situation. She was operating in a male-dominated artistic world where women weren't supposed to have access to the same training, materials, or opportunities as their male counterparts. Female artists were typically limited to small-scale work, miniatures, still lifes, portraits, while the prestigious large-scale historical and religious paintings were reserved for men. Sophonisba had already broken numerous barriers by establishing herself as a successful portrait painter, but she was constantly fighting against the physical and social limitations imposed on women artists. But her elastic limb dreams seemed to free her from every conceivable limitation. In her dream state, Sophonisba could work on multiple large canvases simultaneously, her stretched arms allowing her to create ambitious compositions that would normally require an entire workshop of assistants. She could paint fine details on one canvas while simultaneously applying broad background washes to another, all while maintaining the kind of artistic coordination that seemed superhuman. Sophonisba described the physical sensation of arm extension in letters to her sister Elena. "It is as if my very bones become as flowing water, yet retain their strength. I can feel my arm crossing the entire studio, my hand maintaining its skill even as my elbow passes through the air above the fireplace. The sensation is not painful but rather liberating, as if I had discovered the true reach of the artist's soul." The sensation of stretching wasn't limited to simple elongation. Sophonisba's dream arms could bend and curve in impossible ways, wrapping around corners, threading through narrow spaces, and positioning themselves at angles that would have been anatomically impossible. She described feeling her arm bones becoming flexible like rope, her joints multiplying to create additional points of articulation, and her muscles adapting in real time to support whatever configuration her artistic work required. In her elastic limb dreams, Sophonisba could paint multiple portraits simultaneously, her stretched arms working on different canvases while maintaining separate, independent movements. She could reach around corners to paint subjects in adjacent rooms, stretch her arms through windows to capture outdoor scenes while remaining inside her studio, and even extend her limbs vertically to paint ceiling frescoes from floor level. But the most remarkable aspect of these dreams was how they affected her actual artistic technique. Sophonisba began incorporating perspective and spatial relationships into her paintings that seemed impossible for someone working with normal human proportions. Her portraits showed subjects from multiple angles simultaneously, as if she'd been able to observe them from several positions at once. The psychological experience of having elastic arms was transformative for Sophonisba in ways that went far beyond artistic technique. She described feeling like she discovered her true artistic form, as if normal human anatomy had been constraining her creative potential throughout her career. In her dream journals, she wrote, "With arms that flow like water and reach like light, I understand what painting was meant to be. Every brushstroke can be made from the perfect angle, every color applied from the ideal distance. I'm no longer fighting against the limitations of flesh. I am finally free to create as the soul desires." The elastic arms in her dreams weren't just longer, they were also more sensitive and precise than her normal limbs. Sophonisba could feel texture through her elongated fingertips with incredible acuity, detecting subtle variations in canvas weave, paint consistency, and even the emotional state of her portrait subjects through some kind of enhanced tactile sensitivity. She described being able to feel the subject's personality through the paint, sensing their mood, health, and inner character through her phantom fingertips. Sophonisba's dream journals describe being able to feel texture through her elongated fingertips with incredible sensitivity. She could stretch her hand across a room to touch a subject's face, feeling every line and contour as if she were standing directly beside them, while simultaneously feeling the roughness of canvas and the smoothness of paint through another extended hand working on the opposite side of her studio. Art historians studying Sophonisba's work from the 1559 to 1562 period note that her paintings demonstrate an understanding of three-dimensional space that was far ahead of her contemporaries. She could capture details and backgrounds that suggested she'd observed them from positions that would have been physically impossible for someone standing at an easel, and her portraits showed lighting effects that implied multiple viewpoints. During her elastic limb dreams, Sophonisba developed what she called distance painting techniques, methods for creating artistic effects that seemed to require impossible reach and positioning. She could paint with one extended arm while using another elastic limb to hold complex lighting arrangements, position mirrors for reference, and even manipulate her subject's poses from across the room. Her dream arms could work independently at different tasks while maintaining perfect coordination, as if her consciousness had been distributed across multiple autonomous limbs. The really fascinating aspect was how Sophonisba's phantom limb experiences seemed to enhance her understanding of proportion and spatial relationships. Her paintings from this period show evidence of measuring and proportional techniques that would have required her to observe subjects from multiple distances simultaneously. She could capture the intimate details of facial expressions while also maintaining perfect accuracy in overall body proportions, suggesting that her elastic dream arms allowed her to work at both close and distant ranges without physically moving. Sophonisba's elastic limb dreams also affected her understanding of the relationship between artist and subject in profound ways. She described being able to reach into the soul of her portrait subjects through her extended arms, not just observing their appearance, but somehow touching their inner essence through her phantom limbs. Her portraits from this period demonstrate psychological insight and emotional depth that was unprecedented in Renaissance art, as if her elastic arms had given her access to aspects of human nature that were normally invisible. The social implications of Sophonisba's enhanced artistic abilities were significant. During her elastic limb dream period, she was able to accept commissions that would normally have required teams of assistants and months of work. She could complete multiple portraits simultaneously, work on large-scale compositions that typically exceeded women's artistic scope, and produce artwork with technical complexity that challenged assumptions about female artistic capability. But the psychological impact of these dreams was complex and sometimes troubling. Sophonisba began to feel confined and frustrated by the normal limitations of her physical body. She would stand in front of large canvases, unconsciously reaching toward distant areas as if her arms could still stretch to reach them, only to be disappointed when her limbs stopped at their normal length. She also started experiencing phantom sensations while awake, feeling as if her arms were still extended even when they were clearly at her sides, sensing distant objects through fingertips that weren't actually touching anything. These phantom extension sensations would sometimes last for hours after she woke up, making it difficult for her to judge distances and spatial relationships in her studio. The elastic limb dreams reached their peak intensity during the summer of 1561, when Sophonisba was working on a commission for the Spanish royal court. She wrote to her patron describing dreams where her arms could stretch across entire continents, allowing her to paint portraits of subjects in distant countries without leaving her studio in Italy. She claimed to have painted details of Spanish court life that she'd observed through her dream-extended limbs, details that were later confirmed when she actually traveled to Spain. During this peak period, Sophonisba's elastic limb dreams began incorporating elements that seemed to transcend normal physical limitations entirely. She described her dream arms becoming transparent and ethereal, able to pass through solid objects while maintaining tactile sensation. Her phantom limbs could reach through walls to paint subjects in adjacent buildings, extend through windows to capture landscapes miles away, and even stretch through time to paint historical figures from earlier periods. The artistic productivity Sophonisba achieved during her elastic limb dreams was extraordinary. She would wake up to find her studio filled with completed work that demonstrated techniques and perspectives she couldn't remember executing. Paintings would show evidence of brushwork applied from impossible angles, color mixing that required simultaneous access to multiple palettes, and compositional elements that suggested her arms had moved in ways that defied normal human anatomy. Sophonisba's correspondence from this period reveals her growing obsession with understanding the mechanics of her elastic limb dreams. She began studying anatomy and proportion more intensively, trying to understand how normal human limitations affected artistic capability. She experimented with various tools and devices that might extend her reach: long-handled brushes, adjustable easels, mechanical arms, but nothing could replicate the fluid. Intuitive control she experienced through her phantom elastic limbs. Then, quite suddenly, the dream stopped. Sophonisba woke up one morning in September 1561 feeling trapped within the prison of normal flesh. As she described it in her journal, the return to standard human proportions was so disorienting that she couldn't paint for several weeks, complaining that her arms felt stubby and inadequate compared to the elastic limbs she'd grown accustomed to in her dreams. The psychological adjustment to losing her elastic limb capabilities was severe and long-lasting. Sophonisba fell into a period of artistic depression, feeling like she'd been reduced from a complete creative being to a mere shadow of her true potential. She wrote in her journal, "How can I return to the cramped limitations of ordinary flesh when I have known the freedom of arms that reach to infinity? Every canvas now seems too small, every subject too distant, every artistic challenge impossible without the flowing limbs that once made all things possible." Sophonisba's post-dream artwork shows a marked change in style. Her paintings became more conventional in their spatial relationships, though they retained an unusual sense of intimacy and psychological depth that art historians attribute to her dream experiences of being able to reach across impossible distances to truly touch her subjects. The influence of her elastic limb dreams on Sophonisba's artistic development was permanent and profound. Even after the dreams ended, her work continued to demonstrate the enhanced understanding of space, proportion, and perspective that she'd developed during her phantom limb period. Her later paintings show evidence of techniques that seem to require impossible reach and positioning, as if her conscious artistic skills had been permanently expanded by her dream experiences. Sophonisba spent her remaining decades as an artist trying to recapture the creative freedom she'd experienced through her elastic limbs. She developed innovative painting techniques that maximized her normal arm reach, designed studio arrangements that allowed her to work on multiple canvases efficiently, and mentored younger artists in methods for overcoming physical limitations through creative problem-solving and technical innovation. The really fascinating aspect of Sophonisba's story is how her phantom limb dreams seem to enhance her actual artistic abilities. During the period when she was having elastic arm dreams, her understanding of proportion, perspective, and spatial relationships advanced dramatically, as if her sleeping brain was providing advanced training in three-dimensional perception that carried over into her waking work. Some modern neuroscientists studying Sophonisba's case theorize that her dreams might have been a form of neuroplasticity training, her brain exploring the limits of body schema and spatial awareness in ways that enhanced her actual motor skills and visual processing abilities. It's as if her subconscious was running incredibly sophisticated simulations of extended reach and enhanced dexterity that improved her real-world performance. Modern art historians recognize Sophonisba's work from the elastic limb dream period as representing a crucial bridge between Renaissance artistic traditions and the spatial innovations that would later characterize Baroque art. Her techniques for creating multiple perspectives, complex spatial relationships, and enhanced psychological intimacy influenced artistic development for generations. Either way, Sophonisba Anguissola's elastic limb dreams resulted in some of the most innovative Renaissance art ever created, suggesting that sometimes our phantom body experiences can push the boundaries of human creativity in ways that change art history permanently. In 1420, the Japanese Zen painter Sessho Toyu, who would later become one of the most influential inkwash painters in history, began having dreams that completely transformed his understanding of the relationship between artist, tool, and artwork. Sessho was already known for his innovative brush techniques and his ability to capture the essence of landscapes with minimal, precise strokes, but his detachable hand dreams took his artistic philosophy into territory that was literally beyond the boundaries of physical possibility. In these dreams, Sesher would be working in his studio, painting the misty mountain landscapes that would make him famous, when he would suddenly realize that his hands could separate from his wrists and continue working independently. But this wasn't like having his hands cut off. In the dream, he maintained complete sensory connection with his detached hands, feeling every brushstroke, every texture of paper and silk, every subtle variation in ink consistency through hands that were no longer physically connected to his arms. Now, to understand the profound impact of these dreams on Sesher's artistic development, you need to know something about the cultural and philosophical context of Japanese ink painting in the early 15th century. Sesher was working within the Zen Buddhist tradition, where painting was considered a form of meditation and spiritual practice. The goal wasn't just to create beautiful images, but to achieve a state of consciousness where the artist, the brush, and the subject became unified in a single moment of creative enlightenment. Traditional Zen painting emphasized the concept of no mind, a state where conscious thought and deliberate technique gave way to spontaneous, intuitive creation. Artists spent years training to achieve moments where their brushwork seemed to emerge from pure spirit rather than calculated skill. But Sesher's detachable hand dreams took this philosophical ideal and made it literally, physically real in ways that were both liberating and profoundly unsettling. Sesher described these dreams in his journals using the Buddhist concept of non-attachment, writing, "In dreams of separated hands, I understand the illusion of connection. The hand that paints is not my hand, yet it is more truly mine than the flesh that grows from my wrist. The brush moves through emptiness, yet creates fullness." In his detachable hand dreams, Sesher could send his hands to different parts of his studio, or even to different rooms while maintaining perfect coordination and sensory feedback. He could feel his left hand painting a mountain landscape on one side of the room, while his right hand worked on a portrait on the opposite wall, experiencing both artistic processes simultaneously without confusion or conflict. The sensation of detachment in these dreams wasn't disturbing or painful. Sesher described it as profoundly liberating. He could feel his hands floating through the air, guided by artistic intention rather than physical connection, creating paintings that seemed to emerge from pure creative spirit rather than human technique. He wrote, "When the hands float free, they paint not what the eyes see, but what the soul knows." But the most remarkable aspect of these dreams was how his detached hands seemed to develop their own artistic intelligence. Sesher wrote about watching his separated hands create paintings that were beyond his conscious planning, as if removing the hands from his body had also freed them from the limitations of his deliberate artistic intentions. His dream hands would paint with techniques he'd never consciously learned, combining brushstrokes in ways that produced effects he couldn't replicate while awake. The philosophical implications of Sesher's detachable hand dreams were enormous within the context of Zen Buddhist thought. Traditional Buddhist teaching emphasized the illusory nature of the self and the ultimate unity of all existence, but Sesher was experiencing these abstract concepts as literal, physical reality. His hands could operate independently of his body while remaining connected to his consciousness, suggesting that the boundaries between self and world, artist and artwork were far more flexible than normally assumed. Sesher's detached hands could move through three-dimensional space in ways that were impossible for normal human anatomy. They could approach painting surfaces from any angle, rotate, and position themselves for optimal brushwork, and even work on multiple layers of the same painting simultaneously. He described feeling his hands painting behind and in front of the paper at the same time, creating effects that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions. The sensory experience of controlling detached hands was extraordinarily detailed and realistic. Sesher could feel the weight and balance of brushes held by his floating hands, sense the absorption of ink into paper through his separated fingertips, and experience the resistance and flow of brushstrokes through hands that were moving independently through space. He described being able to feel the texture of silk, the grain of paper, and even the molecular structure of ink through his phantom hands with supernatural sensitivity. During his detachable hand dreams, Sesher developed what he called floating brush techniques, painting methods that seemed to require hands, moving in impossible trajectories and positions. His dream hands could paint continuous lines that wrapped around three-dimensional objects, create brushstrokes that seem to emerge from within the paper rather than being applied to its surface, and produce ink effects that appeared to be painted from multiple directions simultaneously. These detachable hand dreams continued for nearly 2 years, during which time Sescher's actual painting technique underwent dramatic evolution. He began developing brushstrokes that seemed to come from impossible angles, creating effects that suggested his hands had moved in ways that defied normal human anatomy. His paintings from this period show evidence of techniques that would have required arm positions that were physically impossible for someone sitting at a traditional artist's desk. Art historians studying Sescher's work from the 1420-1422 period note that his paintings demonstrate an understanding of spatial freedom that was unprecedented in Japanese art. His brushstrokes showed a kind of three-dimensional movement that implied the artist's hands had been able to approach the canvas from multiple directions simultaneously. The psychological transformation that accompanied Sescher's detachable hand dreams was profound. He began to question fundamental assumptions about the relationship between consciousness and physical embodiment. If his hands could operate independently while remaining under his control, what did that suggest about the nature of identity and selfhood? Were his hands separate tools that he used, or were they extensions of his consciousness that happened to be connected to his body? Sescher also began incorporating elements into his paintings that he claimed came from his detached hands' independent observations. He would paint details of distant mountain peaks that his hands had visited in dreams, landscapes from perspectives that suggested his hands had floated above the scene rather than observing from ground level, and natural phenomena that he said his separated hands had experienced while traveling through dream landscapes. The really fascinating aspect was how Sescher's detached hand experiences influenced his understanding of artistic creation as a spiritual practice. Traditional Zen painting emphasized achieving unity between artist and artwork, but Sescher's dreams suggested that true artistic enlightenment might require the opposite, complete separation between the conscious self and the creative instruments. His detached hands seemed to paint with pure intuition, unconstrained by the artist's deliberate intentions or conscious techniques. During the peak period of his detachable hand dreams, Sescher reported being able to feel phantom sensations in his hands for hours after waking up. He would sense his hands moving independently even when they were clearly attached to his wrists, and he would sometimes try to send his hands to different parts of the room, expecting them to detach and float away as they did in his dreams. Sescher's detachable hand dreams also affected his teaching methods in revolutionary ways. He began instructing his students to imagine their hands operating independently of their conscious control, encouraging them to visualize their brushes moving, through space guided by pure artistic intuition rather than calculated technique. Many of his students reported achieving breakthrough, moments in their own painting when they successfully imagined their hands detaching and working autonomously. The social impact of Sescher's enhanced artistic capabilities during his detachable hand dream period was significant within Japanese artistic circles. His paintings demonstrated techniques and effects that other artists couldn't understand or replicate, establishing him as a master whose methods seemed to transcend normal human limitations. His reputation for supernatural artistic ability was largely established during this period, when his work showed evidence of impossible techniques and otherworldly artistic insight. The dreams reached their most intense point in the spring of 1422, when Sescher claimed his detached hands created an entire series of paintings in a single night, paintings that depicted scenes from locations he'd never visited, painted in techniques he'd never consciously learned. He woke up to find his studio filled with artwork that he didn't remember creating, though the paintings showed clear evidence of his distinctive style. The paintings created during this peak detachment period were remarkable for their technical innovation and spiritual depth. They showed landscapes that seemed to be painted from multiple perspectives simultaneously, as if the artist had been able to observe the subjects from several positions at once. The brushwork demonstrated techniques that wouldn't be developed by other artists for decades, and the spiritual quality of the paintings suggested a level of artistic enlightenment that was unprecedented in Japanese art. Sescher's correspondence from this period reveals his growing understanding of the philosophical implications of his detachable hand experiences. He began developing theories about the relationship between consciousness and physical embodiment that influenced Zen Buddhist thought for centuries. His writings about hand-mind separation became foundational texts for understanding the role of non-attachment in artistic creation. But Sesher also struggled with the practical challenges of his detachable hand dreams. He found it increasingly difficult to paint while awake, as his normal attached hands felt clumsy and limited compared to the floating hands of his dreams. He would stand at his easel making frustrated motions, trying to recreate the fluid, three-dimensional movement that his dream hands could achieve effortlessly. The psychological impact of losing his detachable hand capabilities when the dreams ended was severe and long-lasting. Sesher wrote that he felt imprisoned within attached flesh for months afterward, as if the return to normal hand-wrist connection had limited his artistic possibilities. He spent years trying to recapture the sense of creative freedom he'd experienced during his detachable hand dreams. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the detachable hand dreams stopped. Sesher woke up one morning feeling like he'd lost essential parts of himself, describing his hands as feeling heavy and crude when they could no longer separate from his wrists. The return to normal human anatomy was so disorienting that he couldn't paint effectively for several months, as his brain struggled to readjust to coordinating attached limbs. Sesher's later paintings show clear influence from his phantom hand experiences. His mature work demonstrates an understanding of artistic freedom and spontaneity that seems to come from having experienced creation without physical limitation. His famous landscape paintings suggest hands that could move through three-dimensional space, rather than being constrained by normal human anatomy. The influence of Sesher's detachable hand dreams extended far beyond his personal artistic development. His techniques and philosophical insights became foundational elements of Japanese ink painting for centuries. His understanding of non-attachment as applied to artistic creation influenced generations of Zen painters, and his methods for achieving spontaneous, intuitive brushwork became standard training practices in Japanese art schools. Modern neuroscientists studying Sesher's case theorized that his detachable hand dreams might have been an extreme form of out-of-body experience combined with enhanced proprioceptive awareness. His brain seemed to have created incredibly detailed sensory experiences of hand movement and artistic creation that occurred independently of normal body boundaries. The philosophical implications of Sesher's detachable hand dreams influenced Zen theories about the relationship between consciousness and physical form. His experience became part of Buddhist teachings about non-attachment and the illusory nature of body boundaries, suggesting that true creativity comes from transcending the limitations of physical existence. Either way, Sesher Taio's detachable hand dreams resulted in artistic innovations that influenced Japanese painting for centuries, proving that sometimes our most impossible phantom body experiences can lead to the most extraordinary creative breakthroughs that reshape entire artistic traditions. In 1656, Christian Huygens, the Dutch mathematician, astronomer, and inventor who created the first accurate pendulum clock, began having dreams that gave him additional fingers with supernatural dexterity and precision. Huygens was already famous for his incredibly detailed mechanical work and his ability to create clockwork mechanisms that were far more accurate than anything his contemporaries could produce. But his extra finger dreams took his understanding of precision, craftsmanship into territory that was literally beyond human capability. In these dreams, Huygens would be working in his workshop, assembling the tiny gears and springs that made his clock so remarkably accurate, when he would notice that each of his hands had grown 3 additional fingers. But these weren't just generic extra digits. Each phantom finger had its own specialized function and supernatural sensitivity to mechanical precision. Now, to understand why Huygens' extra finger dreams were so significant, you need to appreciate the incredible precision required for 17th century clockmaking. We're talking about creating mechanical devices that could measure time accurately to within minutes per day, using hand tools and techniques that required almost superhuman dexterity and attention to detail. The gears had to be cut by hand, the springs had to be shaped and tempered with perfect consistency, and the escapement mechanisms had to be assembled with tolerances that were measured in fractions of millimeters. Huygens was already pushing the boundaries of what was humanly possible in terms of mechanical precision, but his extra finger dreams showed him what clockmaking could become if human hands weren't limited by normal anatomy. With 12 fingers instead of 8, he could hold multiple tools simultaneously, manipulate several components at once, and perform assembly operations that would normally require multiple craftsmen working in perfect coordination. Huygens described these dreams in letters to fellow scientists, writing, "In sleep, I am granted the fingers of angels, each one capable of feeling variations in metal thickness that would be invisible to any instrument. With 12 fingers instead of 8, I can assemble mechanisms of complexity that would require a dozen craftsmen working in perfect coordination." The extra fingers in his dreams weren't just additional tools, they seemed to have their own intelligence and expertise. Huygens could feel his phantom third finger on each hand specializing in detecting microscopic imperfections in gear teeth, while his fourth finger developed supernatural sensitivity to spring tension, and his fifth finger could sense variations in metal temperature that affected the expansion and contraction of clockwork components. During these phantom finger dreams, Huygens would create clocks that were impossibly accurate and mechanically complex. He could feel himself assembling gear trains with dozens of interconnected components, each one positioned with precision that would have been impossible with normal human dexterity. His dream hands could work on multiple mechanical systems simultaneously, with each extra finger performing specialized tasks that required years of training to master. The sensory capabilities of Huygens' phantom fingers were extraordinary. He described being able to feel molecular variations in metal alloys through his extra digits, sensing the crystalline structure of different materials and detecting impurities that were invisible to normal examination. His phantom fingers could feel the magnetic properties of iron components, the elasticity of spring steel, and even the acoustic resonance characteristics of different gear materials. But here's what made Huygens' extra finger dreams particularly remarkable. The mechanical insights he gained during these dreams carried over into his waking work. During the period when he was having these phantom digit dreams, Huygens invented several clockwork innovations that were far ahead of their time, including the spiral balance spring that made portable timepieces possible. Huygens wrote detailed descriptions of the sensory experience of having extra fingers, noting that each phantom digit had its own distinct sense of touch, its own relationship to pressure and temperature, and its own specialized knowledge of mechanical principles. He could feel gear ratios through his extra fingers, sense the mathematical relationships between different mechanical components, and experience the flow of mechanical energy through complex clockwork systems. The precision he achieved during his phantom finger dreams was so extraordinary that Huygens began to question whether human hands were adequate tools for creating truly accurate mechanical devices. He started designing specialized tools that could replicate some of the capabilities he experienced through his extra fingers, creating instruments that could measure microscopic variations in metal thickness and detect tiny imperfections in gear teeth. During his most intense phantom finger dreams, Huygens reported being able to feel the passage of time itself through his extra digits. He claimed his phantom fingers could sense the rhythm of pendulum swings, the tension in clock springs, and even the molecular vibrations in metal components that affected timekeeping accuracy. It was as if his extra fingers had become extensions of time itself rather than just additional tools for mechanical work. The psychological experience of having 12 functional fingers was transformative for Huygens in ways that extended far beyond clockmaking. He described feeling like he'd discovered his true craftsman form, as if normal human anatomy had been limiting his mechanical potential throughout his career. With extra fingers, he could hold tools and components in configurations that were impossible with normal hands, work on intricate assemblies without constantly shifting his grip, and maintain tactile awareness of multiple mechanical processes simultaneously. Huygens' phantom finger dreams also gave him insights into the fundamental nature of mechanical precision that influenced his scientific work in other areas. He began to understand that accuracy in timekeeping required not just precise manufacture, but also an intuitive understanding of how mechanical components interacted at the molecular level. His extra fingers seemed to give him direct sensory access to these microscopic interactions. The really fascinating aspect was how Huygens' phantom finger experiences enhanced his understanding of mathematical relationships in mechanical systems. His extra digits could apparently feel gear ratios, spring constants, and pendulum frequencies as tangible sensations rather than abstract calculations. He could sense when mechanical systems were operating in mathematical harmony and detect when tiny variations in manufacturing introduced errors that would accumulate over time. During his phantom finger dreams, Huygens developed what he called molecular clockmaking techniques for creating mechanical devices that took into account the atomic level properties of materials. His extra fingers could detect impurities in metal alloys that affected thermal expansion, sense crystalline irregularities that influenced mechanical strength, and feel surface treatments that reduced friction between moving parts. The productivity Huygens achieved during his phantom finger dreams was extraordinary. He could work on multiple clock mechanisms simultaneously, each requiring different specialized techniques and tools. His extra fingers allowed him to maintain continuous tactile monitoring of several assembly processes, while his normal hands performed the primary construction work. The result was clockwork mechanisms of unprecedented complexity and accuracy. The social impact of Huygens' enhanced clockmaking abilities was significant within the scientific community of 17th century Europe. His clocks became the standard for astronomical observatories and navigation systems, enabling advances in science and exploration that depended on precise timekeeping. The accuracy of his timepieces was so superior to contemporary alternatives that they essentially defined what mechanical precision meant for an entire generation of scientists and craftsmen. Huygens' phantom finger dreams also influenced his work as a mathematician and physicist. The enhanced dexterity and sensitivity he experienced through his extra digits gave him insights into the physical properties of materials and mechanical systems that informed his theoretical work. His studies of pendulum motion, spring mechanics, and gear ratios were all influenced by direct sensory experiences he'd had through his phantom fingers. The psychological impact of these dreams was profound. Huygens became frustrated with the limitations of his normal 8 fingers, feeling like he was working with inadequate tools after experiencing the supernatural precision of 12-finger craftsmanship. He would sometimes find himself reaching for tiny components with fingers that weren't there, expecting to feel mechanical details through phantom digits that existed only in his dreams. Huygens also began experiencing phantom sensations while awake, feeling as if he had extra fingers even when his hands were clearly normal. These phantom digit sensations would sometimes last for hours after he woke up, making it difficult for him to coordinate his normal hand movements and causing him to fumble with tools and components that he could previously handle with expert precision. The mechanical innovations that Huygens developed during his phantom finger dream period were revolutionary and far ahead of their time. His improvements to escapement mechanisms, gear cutting techniques, and spring manufacturing methods established principles that remained standard in clockmaking for centuries. The precision standards he achieved during this period weren't matched by other clockmakers until the development of machine tools in the industrial age. Huygens' extra finger dreams reached their peak intensity during the winter of 1657, when he was working on his most ambitious clock design, a timepiece that would be accurate to within seconds over the course of an entire year. He claimed that his phantom fingers guided him through mechanical calculations and assembly techniques that were beyond his conscious understanding, as if his extra digits had access to mathematical principles that his normal mind couldn't grasp. During this peak period, Huygens reported experiences where his phantom fingers seemed to operate independently of his conscious control, automatically making adjustments and corrections to his clockwork mechanisms. He would watch his extra digits working on intricate assemblies while his conscious mind focused on other aspects of the construction process. It was as if his phantom fingers had developed their own expertise and intelligence. The clocks Huygens created during his phantom finger dream period were so mechanically advanced that they weren't fully understood by other clockmakers for decades. His innovations in escapement design, gear ratios, and spring mechanisms seemed to come from nowhere, representing sudden leaps in understanding that his contemporaries couldn't explain. Contemporary clockmakers who examined Huygens' work during this period reported finding evidence of assembly techniques that seemed impossible to achieve with normal human hands. Gear trains showed precision tolerances that exceeded what hand tools should have been able to produce, and spring mechanisms demonstrated manufacturing consistency that suggested the use of specialized equipment that didn't exist at the time. Huygens' correspondence from this period reveals his growing obsession with understanding the relationship between consciousness, physical dexterity, and mechanical precision. He began developing theories about the limits of human craftsmanship and the possibility of transcending those limits through enhanced body consciousness. His writings on the philosophy of precision manufacturing influenced scientific thought about the relationship between human capability and mechanical achievement. But Huygens also struggled with the practical challenges of his phantom finger dreams. The gap between what he could accomplish with 12 fingers in his dreams and what he could achieve with 8 fingers while awake became increasingly frustrating. He began to feel that his waking hands were inadequate tools for the level of precision that his phantom digits had shown him was possible. The psychological burden of experiencing supernatural dexterity only to lose it upon waking became increasingly difficult for Huygens to bear. He wrote to his brother about feeling cursed with knowledge of perfection that flesh cannot achieve, describing the torment of knowing exactly how precise his clockwork could be if only he had access to his phantom fingers while awake. Then, in the spring of 1658, the dreams suddenly stopped. Huygens wrote to his brother Constantine, describing the experience of returning to 8-finger craftsmanship as working while wearing thick gloves I can accomplish the task, but I have lost the intimate connection with the mechanical world that made true precision possible. The loss of his phantom finger capabilities was devastating for Huygens both personally and professionally. He fell into a period of depression and creative frustration that lasted for months as he struggled to accept the limitations of normal human dexterity after experiencing the supernatural precision of 12-finger clockmaking. Huygens' post-dream clockwork, while still superior to anything his contemporaries could produce, never again achieved the impossible precision and mechanical elegance of the timepieces he created during his phantom finger period. He spent years trying to recapture the supernatural dexterity he'd experienced in his dreams, developing increasingly sophisticated tools and techniques in an attempt to compensate for the loss of his extra digits. The influence of Huygens' phantom finger dreams extended far beyond clockmaking into broader questions about human potential and the limits of craftsmanship. His experience suggested that the boundaries of human capability might be more flexible than traditionally assumed, and that consciousness could potentially access enhanced physical abilities under certain circumstances. Modern horologists studying Huygens' clocks from the 1656 to 1658 period note that these timepieces demonstrate mechanical principles and assembly techniques that seem to require more precision than human hands could possibly achieve. Some researchers theorize that Huygens' phantom finger dreams allowed his brain to simulate enhanced dexterity and mechanical sensitivity that improved his actual motor skills and understanding of precision engineering. The technological innovations that emerged from Huygens' phantom finger experiences had implications that extended far beyond timekeeping. His enhanced understanding of precision manufacturing, material properties, and mechanical tolerances influenced developments in scientific instrumentation, navigation equipment, and mechanical engineering that were crucial to the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Either way, Christian Huygens' phantom finger dreams resulted in clockmaking innovations that were centuries ahead of their time, proving that sometimes our most impossible body boundary dreams can push the limits of human achievement in ways that change the course of scientific and technological progress permanently. During the American Civil War, Dr. Emma Walker served as one of the Union Army's most skilled battlefield surgeons, performing amputations and emergency operations under conditions that would challenge even modern medical professionals. But starting in 1863, after treating hundreds of soldiers with severe limb injuries, Dr. Walker began having dreams that gave her an additional arm specifically designed for surgical procedures. Now, you have to understand the context here. Civil War battlefield medicine was basically organized chaos. Surgeons were working in converted barns, abandoned churches, and makeshift hospital tents, often with inadequate lighting, minimal supplies, and wounded soldiers arriving faster than they could be treated. The mortality rate for surgical procedures was horrifically high, not just because of the severity of injuries, but because surgeons simply couldn't coordinate all the tasks required for complex operations while working alone. In these dreams, Dr. Walker would be operating on wounded soldiers when she would suddenly realize that she had grown a third arm directly from the center of her chest. This phantom limb wasn't just an extra appendage, it was a perfectly coordinated surgical instrument with supernatural precision and endurance. Her dream third arm could hold retractors, suture wounds, and perform delicate operations while her normal hands worked on other tasks. The really unsettling part? Dr. Walker's phantom surgical arm could feel things that normal hands couldn't detect. She could sense infection through touch, feel the exact depth needed for incisions, and detect internal injuries that weren't visible from the surface. Her dream third arm seemed to have medical knowledge that exceeded her conscious training. Dr. Walker described the sensation of her phantom third arm as feeling like a limb made of pure surgical intuition. She could feel diseased tissue through her phantom fingertips, detecting areas of infection or internal bleeding that weren't apparent through normal examination. Her third arm seemed to know instinctively where to apply pressure to stop bleeding, how deep to cut for optimal healing, and which injured areas required immediate attention versus those that could wait. The psychological experience of having a chest-mounted surgical arm was initially disturbing, but Dr. Walker quickly adapted to the enhanced capabilities it provided. She could perform operations that normally required two surgeons working in coordination, maintaining continuous pressure on bleeding arteries with her phantom arm while her normal hands worked on suturing, cleaning wounds, and preparing instruments. During the period when she was having these dreams, Dr. Walker's surgical success rate improved dramatically. She began performing operations that other surgeons considered impossible, saving lives that would have been lost under normal circumstances. Her colleagues couldn't understand how one person could coordinate so many simultaneous surgical tasks with apparent ease. But the phantom third arm dreams came at a psychological cost. Dr. Walker became dependent on the sensation of having extra surgical capability, and she would wake up feeling inadequate and clumsy with only two hands available for operations. She started making surgical errors during her waking hours because her brain was trying to coordinate movements with an arm that wasn't there. The phantom surgical arm also seemed to have its own emotional responses to the suffering it encountered. Dr. Walker wrote in her journal about feeling her third arm weeping when touching mortally wounded soldiers, experiencing a kind of empathic connection to patient pain that was both profound and emotionally exhausting. The phantom limb seemed to absorb the emotional trauma of battlefield surgery in ways that her normal consciousness couldn't process. Brother Thomas of Canterbury worked as a manuscript illuminator in the 13th century, spending his days creating elaborate decorated texts for the monastery library. But in 1267, Brother Thomas began having dreams where his writing hand would sprout multiple tentacle-like appendages, each one capable of holding a different pen and writing in a different script simultaneously. Now, medieval manuscript production was an incredibly labor-intensive process that required extraordinary patience and precision. A single illuminated manuscript could take months or even years to complete, with scribes working by candlelight to copy religious texts, legal documents, and scholarly works by hand. The work required not just perfect penmanship, but also knowledge of multiple languages, decorative techniques, and artistic skills for creating the elaborate illuminated letters and margin decorations that made these manuscripts works of art. Brother Thomas was already known as one of the monastery's most skilled scribes, capable of working in Latin, French, and Middle English, with expertise in several different calligraphy styles. But his phantom tentacle dreams took his capabilities into territory that was literally superhuman. In his dream state, his writing hand would suddenly sprout 6 to 8 flexible, tentacle-like appendages, each one as dexterous and precise as his original fingers. In his phantom tentacle dreams, Brother Thomas could create entire illuminated manuscripts in a single session, with each tentacle finger working on different sections of text while maintaining perfect calligraphy and coordination. He could feel the ink flowing through multiple pens simultaneously, sense the texture of parchment through dozens of tentacle fingers, and experience the rhythm of multiple writing styles being executed at once. The manuscripts Brother Thomas created during his tentacle dreams were impossibly complex and detailed, featuring multiple languages, elaborate decorative borders, and illustrative elements that seemed to require the coordination of several different artists working simultaneously. His dream tentacles could write Latin text while simultaneously drawing decorative flourishes and creating detailed illustrations. Brother Thomas described the sensation of having tentacle fingers as like being possessed by the spirit of an entire scriptorium. Each tentacle brings its own knowledge and skill, working in harmony to create texts of impossible beauty and complexity. The tentacles seemed to have specialized functions. Some were expert in Gothic script, others excelled at decorative initials, and still others could create intricate margin illustrations with supernatural detail. The really fascinating aspect was how each tentacle seemed to have its own personality and expertise. Brother Thomas wrote about his Latin tentacle that could compose religious poetry while transcribing, his illumination tentacle that created decorative elements with artistic sophistication he'd never consciously learned, and his correction tentacle that could spot and fix errors in text that other tentacles were producing simultaneously. During these phantom tentacle dreams, Brother Thomas would work with a speed and complexity that was impossible for normal human hands. He could coordinate 8 different writing implements, manage multiple ink colors, and create textual layouts that demonstrated understanding of proportion and design principles far beyond his conscious training. The tentacles could bend and curve in ways that allowed access to any part of a manuscript page from a single seated position. The sensory experience was remarkable. Brother Thomas could feel the absorption of ink into parchment through multiple tentacle tips simultaneously, sense the grain and texture of different writing surfaces through his phantom appendages, and experience the resistance of various pen nibs as they moved across the page. Each tentacle seemed to have its own specialized sensitivity. Some could detect the quality of ink and alert him when it was becoming too thick or thin, while others could sense when parchment was beginning to wear thin from repeated corrections. The psychological impact of these dreams was profound for Brother Thomas. He described feeling like he'd discovered his true scribe form, as if normal human hands had been limiting his ability to serve God through the creation of sacred texts. With his phantom tentacles, he could work on multiple manuscripts simultaneously, create texts of unprecedented beauty and complexity, and achieve a level of productivity that seemed divinely inspired. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Brother Thomas's tentacle dreams was how they seemed to enhance his knowledge and understanding of the texts he was copying. His phantom tentacles appeared to have access to information that exceeded his conscious learning. He would find himself writing in languages he'd never studied, incorporating theological concepts he'd never encountered, and creating illuminated letters that demonstrated artistic techniques he'd never been taught. The tentacles could apparently read and comprehend text independently of his conscious mind. Brother Thomas wrote about watching his tentacles automatically correct errors in ancient manuscripts, complete damaged text where portions of original documents had been lost, and even compose original commentary that demonstrated scholarly understanding far beyond his formal education. During his most intense tentacle dreams, Brother Thomas created manuscripts that were so theologically sophisticated and artistically advanced that they attracted the attention of church scholars throughout Europe. His illuminated books featured innovations in layout, decoration, and textual analysis that influenced manuscript production for centuries. The phantom tentacle dreams continued for nearly 2 years, during which time Brother Thomas produced some of the most remarkable illuminated manuscripts in medieval history. Modern paleographers studying his work from this period note that the texts, show evidence of multiple simultaneous writing techniques that would have been impossible for a single person to coordinate. The manuscripts demonstrate knowledge of Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic texts that Brother Thomas shouldn't have had access to, and they include artistic elements that anticipate Renaissance innovations in decorative design. But the psychological cost of these dreams was significant. Brother Thomas became increasingly frustrated with the limitations of normal human hands when trying to work on manuscripts while awake. He would find himself making motions as if reaching for pens with tentacles that weren't there, and he struggled to maintain the same level of artistic and scholarly sophistication that his phantom tentacles achieved effortlessly. The dreams also created theological concerns for Brother Thomas. He worried that his enhanced abilities might be demonic in origin rather than divine gifts, and he struggled with questions about whether it was appropriate to use knowledge that came through dreams rather than formal study. His fellow monks were amazed by his productivity and the quality of his work, but Brother Thomas himself was tormented by uncertainty about the source of his enhanced capabilities. When the tentacle dreams finally ended, Brother Thomas felt like he'd lost essential parts of himself. He wrote in his journal about feeling reduced to mere human limitations and mourning the loss of his phantom tentacles as if they had been real body parts. His subsequent manuscript work, while still of high quality, never again achieved the impossible complexity and beauty of the texts he'd created during his tentacle dream period. In 1580, Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina, one of the most influential composers of Renaissance, polyphonic music, began having dreams where he could grow additional hands from his shoulders, allowing him to play keyboard instruments with superhuman complexity and coordination. Now, to understand why this was so significant, you need to know something about Renaissance polyphonic music. Palestrina was working during the height of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, when the Church was demanding that sacred music be both spiritually inspiring and technically sophisticated. Polyphonic composition required creating multiple independent, melodic lines that interwove with mathematical precision while maintaining emotional and spiritual impact. The challenge was enormous. Composers had to think in 4, 6, or even 8 separate musical voices simultaneously, each with its own rhythm, melody, and harmonic function. But performing this music was even more challenging than composing it. Keyboard instruments of the period required incredible dexterity to execute complex polyphonic pieces, and even the most skilled musicians were limited by having only 10 fingers. The intricate counterpoint that made Renaissance music so sophisticated was often impossible to perform as written, requiring compromise and simplification that diminished the composer's original vision. In these phantom hand dreams, Palestrina could feel himself playing elaborate polyphonic compositions that required far more than 10 fingers to execute. His extra dream hands could reach across multiple keyboards simultaneously, playing intricate counterpoint melodies that interwove with mathematical precision and emotional depth that exceeded anything possible with normal human dexterity. Palestrina described the sensation of having extra hands as experiencing music as God intended, not limited by the poverty of human anatomy, but free to express the full complexity of harmonic truth. His phantom hands could feel the relationship between different melodic lines through touch, sensing how various musical voices combined to create harmonic structures that his normal consciousness couldn't fully comprehend. The extra hands in his dreams weren't just additional fingers, they seemed to have their own musical intelligence and knowledge. Each phantom hand specialized in different aspects of musical performance. Some focused on bass lines and harmonic foundation, others excelled at intricate melodic ornamentation, and still others could coordinate rhythmic patterns that provided structural framework for the entire composition. During his extra hand dreams, Palestrina would compose musical pieces that pushed the boundaries of Renaissance polyphony. His dream compositions featured multiple independent melodic lines that required supernatural coordination to perform, yet created harmonic effects that were profoundly moving and mathematically elegant. He could feel his phantom hands executing passages that would have required several skilled musicians working in perfect synchronization. The sensory experience of having multiple hands was extraordinary. Palestrina could feel different keyboard textures through each set of phantom fingers, the smooth resistance of wooden keys, The subtle variations in touch sensitivity across different octaves, and the acoustic resonance of the instrument's sound chamber. Each extra hand seemed to have its own relationship to the music, contributing its unique voice to the overall harmonic structure. Palestrina's phantom hand dreams also gave him insights into the mathematical relationships underlying musical harmony that influenced his compositional technique. His extra hands could apparently feel numerical ratios between different musical intervals, sense the geometric patterns created by intersecting melodic lines, and experience the acoustic physics of sound production in ways that informed his understanding of musical theory. The psychological impact of these dreams was intense. Palestrina became frustrated with the limitations of normal human hands when trying to perform the complex compositions he'd experienced in his dreams. He began writing music that was specifically designed to push the limits of human dexterity, creating pieces that required performers to stretch their technical abilities to the absolute maximum. During his phantom hand dream period, Palestrina composed some of his most sophisticated and influential works, including masses and motets that demonstrated unprecedented complexity in polyphonic writing. His music from this period shows evidence of harmonic thinking that seems to require the ability to coordinate more melodic lines, simultaneously than normal human consciousness can manage. The really fascinating aspect was how Palestrina's extra hand experiences seemed to enhance his understanding of musical structure and composition. His phantom hands could apparently feel the architectural relationships between different sections of a composition, sense when harmonic progressions were mathematically optimal, and detect subtle rhythmic patterns that created structural unity across lengthy musical works. When the extra hand dreams ended, Palestrina felt like he'd lost access to musical dimensions that normal human performance couldn't reach. He spent years trying to recreate through written composition the complex harmonic effects he'd experienced while performing with phantom hands, developing notational techniques and compositional methods that allowed multiple performers to achieve together what his dream hands had accomplished alone. In 1847, Sir John Richardson was leading an Arctic expedition when he began having dreams where his hands and feet would multiply and develop supernatural sensitivity to temperature and weather conditions. These phantom limbs could sense approaching storms, detect dangerous ice conditions, and navigate through Arctic conditions that would be impossible for normal human senses. Now, Arctic exploration in the 19th century was basically a death sentence with better equipment. Richardson was leading a search mission for the Lost Franklin expedition, traveling through some of the most hostile environments on Earth with primitive navigation tools and survival equipment. The ability to predict weather changes, detect safe ice conditions, and sense environmental dangers was literally the difference between life and death for Arctic explorers. Richardson's phantom cold-sensing limbs could feel variations in ice thickness through touch, detect wind patterns that predicted weather changes, and sense the location of open water channels even when they were miles away. His dream limbs seemed to be perfectly adapted for Arctic survival, with enhanced circulation, supernatural cold resistance, and the ability to detect dangers that normal human senses couldn't perceive. The sensation of having cold-sensing phantom limbs was unlike anything Richardson had experienced. He could feel atmospheric pressure changes through his extra hands and feet, sensing approaching blizzards hours before they arrived. His phantom limbs could detect the structural integrity of ice formations by touch, feeling internal stress patterns that indicated when frozen surfaces were becoming unstable and dangerous to cross. But perhaps most remarkably, Richardson's phantom limbs seemed to have access to information about the Arctic environment that exceeded normal sensory input. His dream hands could sense the location of seal breathing holes under thick ice, detect the movement of caribou herds across vast distances, and even feel the magnetic variations that affected compass navigation in polar regions. During the period when he was having these dreams, Richardson's expedition achieved remarkable success in mapping previously unexplored Arctic regions. His ability to predict weather changes and navigate dangerous ice conditions was so accurate that his crew began calling him the Ice Prophet. He could guide his team safely around pressure ridges, lead them to fresh water sources, and predict exactly when ice conditions would be safe for travel. Richardson described the psychological experience of having cold sensing, phantom limbs, as feeling like he'd developed a direct neural connection to the Arctic environment itself. He could sense the personality of different ice formations, feel the mood of approaching weather systems, and experience the Arctic landscape as a living entity rather than a hostile wasteland. But Richardson's phantom limb dreams also showed him the tragic fate of the Franklin expedition, which had disappeared in the Arctic 2 years earlier. Through his cold-sensing dream limbs, Richardson claimed to experience the final moments of Franklin's crew, feeling their desperate struggle against impossible cold and starvation through phantom sensations that were more vivid than his own memories. The visions of the Franklin expedition's fate were emotionally devastating for Richardson. He could feel through his phantom limbs the gradual weakening of the lost explorers, sense their growing desperation as their supplies ran out, and experience the final stages of hypothermia and starvation that claimed their lives. The phantom sensations were so realistic that Richardson would wake up feeling like he'd personally experienced the suffering of men who had died months earlier. Richardson's cold-sensing phantom limbs also seemed to provide tactical information about Arctic survival that enhanced his expedition's chances of success. His dream limbs could sense which emergency shelters would provide adequate protection from wind and cold, detect food sources that normal observation would miss, and even identify safe routes through treacherous terrain by feeling subtle temperature and wind patterns. The phantom limb information proved to be remarkably accurate when Richardson's expedition later discovered evidence of the Franklin expedition's fate, confirming details that Richardson had experienced through his cold-sensing dream limbs months before finding physical evidence of the tragedy. When Richardson's phantom cold-sensing dreams finally ended, he felt like he'd lost an essential survival sense that had become crucial to his Arctic exploration abilities. He struggled to navigate polar environments without the supernatural environmental sensitivity that his phantom limbs had provided, and he never again achieved the same level of success in Arctic exploration that he'd experienced during his phantom limb dream period. Listening to all these stories about phantom limbs and extra body parts in dreams, you might be wondering what the hell was going on with people's brains throughout history. Were they all just having weird stress dreams, or is there something deeper happening here that we still don't understand? The thing is, phantom limb sensations have been documented across every culture and time period in human history. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri describe patients feeling sensation in amputated limbs. Greek physicians wrote about soldiers who could still feel their missing arms years after battlefield injuries. Medieval medical texts discussed the ghost limb phenomenon as if it were a completely normal part of human experience. But what we've been talking about tonight goes way beyond typical phantom limb syndrome. We're dealing with people who dreamed about growing extra body parts, limbs they never actually had, and experienced complete sensory feedback from these impossible anatomical additions. That's a completely different neurological phenomenon, and honestly, modern science still doesn't have great explanations for it. Dr. V.S. Ramachandran, one of the world's leading experts on phantom limb research, has spent decades studying how the brain creates our sense of body boundaries and physical self. His work suggests that our feeling of where our body ends and the world begins is actually much more flexible and changeable than most people realize. Here's what's really interesting. Ramachandran's experiments show that you can actually trick people into feeling ownership of fake limbs, rubber hands, and even completely non-human objects. In his famous rubber hand illusion experiment, people start feeling sensation in a fake rubber hand after just a few minutes of synchronized touching. The brain is apparently willing to incorporate almost anything into its body schema if the sensory input is convincing enough. So when Leonardo da Vinci dreams about having 6 arms and can feel every brushstroke through his phantom limbs, or when Admiral Nelson experiences his ships as extensions of his own nervous system, they might be experiencing extreme versions of the same neurological flexibility that allows all of us to feel phantom sensations under the right circumstances. Ancient cultures had completely different ways of understanding these phenomena. In medieval Europe, phantom limb dreams were often interpreted as messages from God or visits from angels, who were temporarily expanding human capabilities for divine purposes. Islamic medical scholars wrote about dreamlands as evidence that the soul's true form was different from the physical body's limitations. Chinese traditional medicine has this concept called qi extension, the idea that your life energy can project beyond your physical body boundaries and create sensations in areas where you don't actually have flesh and bone. Acupuncturists still use these principles today, working with energy meridians that extend well beyond the actual anatomical structures they're supposed to be treating. Indigenous cultures around the world have shamanic traditions that specifically involve expanding body consciousness beyond normal physical limits. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime practices include techniques for experiencing the world through extended limbs, additional sensory organs, and non-human body configurations. Native American vision quests often involve dreams where people temporarily inhabit animal bodies or experience human bodies with supernatural capabilities. What's fascinating is how these phantom body part dreams seem to cluster around periods of intense creativity, high stress, or major historical upheaval. Leonardo's six-armed dreams happened during the height of the Renaissance when artistic and scientific innovation was exploding across Europe. Nelson's phantom fleet dreams occurred during the Napoleonic Wars when naval technology was advancing rapidly. Brother Augustine's thousand-eye dreams coincided with the Black Death, one of the most traumatic periods in European history. It's almost like the human brain responds to periods of rapid change or extreme challenge by expanding its sense of physical possibility. When normal human capabilities aren't enough to deal with current circumstances, our dreaming minds start experimenting with enhanced body configurations that might be better adapted to handle whatever challenges we're facing. Modern neuroscience has identified something called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, form new neural connections, and basically rewire its own circuitry based on experience and need. What if phantom body part dreams are an extreme example of neuroplasticity in action? What if our sleeping brains are running simulations of enhanced human capabilities, testing out body configurations that might be better suited for survival or creativity? There's also some really interesting research on something called embodied cognition, the idea that our thinking processes are fundamentally shaped by our physical body structure. People who have different body configurations, whether due to amputation, paralysis, or just natural variation in anatomy, actually think differently about spatial relationships, time perception, and problem-solving approaches. So when Sophonis Anguissola dreams about having elastic arms and then develops revolutionary artistic techniques, or when Christian Huygens experiences extra fingers and invents clockwork mechanisms that are centuries ahead of their time, they might be gaining cognitive insights that are only accessible through temporarily, experiencing alternative body configurations. The really mind-bending question is whether these phantom body part dreams are just neurological curiosities, or whether they represent some kind of evolutionary exploration. What if human consciousness occasionally experiments with body configurations that might be useful for future adaptation? What if dreams about extra limbs, enhanced senses, and expanded physical capabilities are our brain's way of testing out possibilities for human evolution? I mean, think about it. Every single story we've discussed tonight involves someone whose phantom body dreams directly led to innovations, discoveries, or capabilities that were far beyond what their contemporaries could achieve. Leonardo's six-armed dreams resulted in artistic techniques that influenced Renaissance art for centuries. Nelson's phantom fleet dreams led to naval strategies that changed the course of European history. Huygens' extra finger dreams produced clockwork innovations that were the foundation for modern precision engineering. Maybe phantom body part dreams aren't just random neurological glitches. Maybe they're glimpses of human potential that we haven't figured out how to access while awake. Maybe our sleeping brains sometimes tap into possibilities that our conscious minds can't imagine, showing us what human capability might look like if we weren't limited by current physical constraints. Before we drift off completely tonight, let me share a few lesser-known phantom body part dream stories that almost nobody talks about. These are the really obscure cases that make you wonder just how flexible human consciousness can actually become. In 1688, A Swiss clockmaker named Johann Zimmermann began having dreams where his fingertips could directly perceive the passage of time. Not just feel the mechanical rhythm of clockwork, mind you, but actually sense time itself flowing like a tangible substance that he could touch and manipulate with his phantom time fingers. Zimmermann described the sensation as feeling the texture of minutes, the weight of hours, the temperature of centuries. His dream fingers could detect temporal irregularities, moments when time moved slightly faster or slower than normal, and he claimed he could adjust the flow of time by gently touching it with his phantom fingertips. What made Johann's case absolutely extraordinary was how his phantom time-sensing abilities seemed to affect physical reality. During these dreams, Zimmermann created clocks that somehow became more accurate than the passage of time itself. His timepieces would occasionally run fast, as if they were anticipating the future, then slow down to match normal time exactly when important events occurred. Local astronomers began using Zimmermann's clocks to predict celestial events because his timepieces seemed to sense cosmic timing patterns that weren't detectable through normal observation. Johann's dream journals described the experience of touching time as feeling like stroking the fur of some vast, invisible creature that moves through all existence. He could sense when historical events were approaching through temporal vibrations that traveled backward through his phantom fingertips, and he claimed to feel the emotional weight of future tragedies and celebrations, pressing against his dream hands like physical objects. The psychological impact of sensing time directly was profound and disturbing. Johann wrote about feeling the burden of knowing when people would die, when disasters would strike, and when significant historical changes would occur. His phantom time fingers could apparently detect the temporal signatures of major events months or years before they happened, creating an overwhelming sense of responsibility and helplessness. The really eerie part? Zimmermann aged very slowly during the period when he was having time-sensing dreams. People who knew him remarked that he seemed to have stopped aging entirely, as if his phantom fingers had learned to manipulate his personal relationship with temporal flow. When the dreams ended after 2 years, Zimmermann rapidly aged a decade in just a few months, as if time was catching up with him all at once. During the 1665 London plague outbreak, Dr. Nathaniel Hodges developed phantom arm sensations that could detect disease in patients before symptoms appeared. His dream limbs could feel illness as a kind of spiritual heaviness, sensing infection patterns that weren't visible to normal medical examination. Dr. Hodges' phantom disease-detecting arms could reach through clothing and flesh to touch the spiritual essence of illness directly. He described being able to feel plague bacteria as tiny, dark spots that created a specific tingling sensation in his dream fingertips. And he could sense exactly which patients would recover and which were beyond medical help. What made Dr. Hodges' phantom limbs particularly remarkable was their apparent ability to sense disease across entire neighborhoods. His dream arms could extend for miles, feeling the spread of infection through London's population like a vast, living map of suffering and death. He would wake up knowing which districts were about to experience plague outbreaks, which families needed to evacuate immediately, and which areas were becoming safe again as the disease moved on. The sensory detail of his phantom disease detecting limbs was extraordinary. Dr. Hodges could feel different types of illness through his dream arms. Plague bacteria felt like sharp, cold pinpricks, while other infections had their own distinct textures and temperatures. He could sense the strength of patients' immune systems through his phantom touch, feeling robust health as warmth and vitality, while serious illness registered as cold, heavy shadows that seemed to drain energy from his dream limbs. Using information from his phantom limb dreams, Dr. Hodges achieved a patient survival rate that was impossibly high for 17th century plague treatment. He would isolate patients based on what his dream arms detected, prescribe treatments that seemed to come from nowhere, and predict the course of the epidemic with remarkable accuracy. His phantom limbs could apparently feel which medicines would be effective for specific patients, sensing the interaction between treatments and individual body chemistry through direct touch. The strangest detail? Dr. Hodges never contracted the plague despite treating hundreds of infected patients. He claimed his phantom disease-detecting limbs could sense illness approaching his own body and guide him away from dangerous exposures before his conscious mind was aware of any risk. His dream arms would recoil from contaminated areas, pull him away from infected patients at crucial moments, and even guide him to wash his hands or change his clothes when his phantom limbs detected dangerous levels of contamination. In 1832, a British explorer named Captain William Scoresby became trapped alone in the Arctic ice for 3 months. During this period of extreme isolation and cold, he began having dreams where his hands could generate supernatural heat, warming not just his own body but the entire environment around him. Scoresby's phantom heat-generating hands could melt ice through touch, warm frozen food back to edible temperatures, and create pockets of tropical climate in the middle of Arctic winter. He described being able to feel thermal energy flowing through his dream hands like liquid fire that never caused pain or damage. The sensation of generating heat through phantom limbs was unlike anything in normal human experience. Scoresby could feel warmth radiating outward from his dream hands in waves, melting snow and ice in expanding circles around his position. His phantom hands could apparently control the intensity and direction of heat generation, creating focused beams of warmth that could melt through thick ice or gentle, diffuse heat that could warm his entire shelter without causing dangerous temperature fluctuations. What made Scoresby's phantom heat-generating abilities particularly remarkable was their apparent effect on Arctic wildlife. Animals that would normally avoid human contact began gathering around his shelter, drawn by the supernatural warmth emanating from his dream hands. Seals would surface through ice holes near his position, Arctic foxes would sleep near his shelter, and even polar bears would approach peacefully, apparently seeking the warmth that his phantom hands could provide. Using techniques he learned from his heat-generating hand dreams, Scoresby survived conditions that should have been fatal. When rescue teams finally found him, they discovered that he had created a survival shelter that was inexplicably warm despite having no fuel for fires. The ice around his shelter had melted and refrozen in patterns that suggested an internal heat source that defied physical explanation. Plants had somehow begun growing in the immediate area around his shelter, creating a small oasis of life in the frozen wasteland. Scoresby's rescuers noted that his hands remained unusually warm for months after his rescue, as if his phantom heat-generating abilities had partially carried over into his waking life. He never again experienced normal cold sensitivity, and he spent his remaining years exploring Arctic regions that other explorers found too harsh to endure. His enhanced cold resistance allowed him to make geographical discoveries that contributed significantly to Arctic mapping and understanding of polar climate systems. The psychological impact of Scoresby's phantom heat-generating dreams was profound and lasting. He described feeling like he'd been granted temporary access to elemental forces that were normally beyond human control. The ability to generate warmth through will alone gave him a sense of power and capability that transformed his understanding of human potential and the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. Sometimes I wonder if these obscure phantom limb dreamers were accessing human capabilities that we've forgotten how to use. Maybe there are potentials built into human consciousness that only become accessible under extreme circumstances, or during altered states of awareness that we don't normally experience. The relationship between dreaming and physical reality seems far more complex than most people assume. These historical accounts suggest that consciousness might occasionally transcend the normal boundaries between imagination and physical capability, allowing people to access enhanced abilities that blur the line between what's possible and what's merely dreamed. What's particularly fascinating about these obscure cases is how they seem to involve phantom body parts that respond to specific environmental challenges or professional needs. Johann's time-sensing fingers emerged during a period when accurate timekeeping was becoming crucial for navigation and scientific observation. Dr. Hodges' disease-detecting limbs appeared during one of history's worst plague outbreaks. Scoresby's heat-generating hands developed during extreme survival conditions in the Arctic. It's almost as if human consciousness can temporarily develop enhanced capabilities that are precisely suited to whatever challenges or Opportunities are present in the dreamer's environment. Maybe our brains are constantly running background simulations of enhanced human abilities, testing out phantom body configurations that might be useful for survival, creativity, or problem solving in ways we don't normally recognize. If you're somehow still awake, which honestly surprises me, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment below and let me know. Are you one of those people who actually makes it through entire 2-hour episodes? Or did you drift off somewhere around Leonardo's 6 arms? After researching all these phantom body part dreams, I keep thinking about how limited we assume human consciousness has to be. Every single story we've explored tonight involves someone whose dream experiences directly expanded their waking capabilities in ways that seemed impossible. Maybe the boundaries between dreaming and reality, between imagination and physical ability, are more flexible than we've been taught to believe. Dreams don't just happen to you. They reshape your understanding of what's possible. And sometimes, apparently, they reshape your body's relationship with the world in ways that can change history. So next time you wake up feeling like you've lost something essential, like some part of yourself got left behind in your dreams, maybe pay attention to that feeling. Maybe your sleeping mind was exploring possibilities that your waking consciousness hasn't figured out how to access yet. Sweet dreams, everyone. And who knows? Maybe tonight you'll discover you have more hands, eyes, or fingers than you thought possible. See you in your dreams.